Rare AB negative girl fainted at airport. Billionaire's secret daughter revealed. Her tiny body crumpled on the cold airport chair, lips turning purple, clutching a ragged stuffed rabbit like it was her last breath of safety. James Whitmore, a man who ruled over airports across America, suddenly stood frozen. For all his wealth, he could not stop a 6-year-old girl from slipping away before his eyes. In that moment, money, power, and pride meant nothing against the silence of death approaching. What would you have done in his place? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Please subscribe to Emotional Echoes channel. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more souls can feel these stories. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Now, let me tell you what happened that night. James had walked through countless airports in his life, always with the same detached gaze, always focused on operations and profits. Tonight was no different, until he noticed a small figure curled up on a chair near the terminal wall. At first, he assumed it was another lost child, one of many whose parents were careless. He told himself someone else would handle it. He was not a man who stopped for strangers. But then he caught the color of her lips, a bluish tint that no child should ever have. His steps slowed. The stuffed rabbit clutched tightly against her chest was worn and dirty, like it had been dragged through too many lonely nights. Something in that detail unsettled him. He frowned, torn between irritation at the chaos of airports and an unease he could not explain. A security officer noticed her too and called for medical support. James stayed back at first, arms crossed, watching as if to reassure himself this was not his problem. Yet when the nurse bent down, checked her pulse, and looked up with urgency, his stomach tightened. Her hemoglobin is dangerously low. She's in critical anemia crisis. The words sliced through the air, and this time James could not pretend to ignore them. The girl's chest rose shallowly, each breath a battle. The nurse placed an oxygen mask on her face, but her tiny hand slipped away from the armrest, limp as though life itself had let go. James felt his throat constrict. She looked no older than 6, far too young to be fighting for every breath under the harsh fluorescent lights. His composure cracked, and for reasons he could not explain, he stepped closer. When they lifted her onto the stretcher, her head lolled to the side, the rabbit still clutched tight. James heard himself whisper, "Stay with us, little one." The sound of his own voice startled him. It had been years since he spoke to anyone in that tone, years since his wife's death had hollowed him out. He felt the weight of helplessness press against his chest, heavy and unfamiliar. And though he did not yet know why, James Whitmore sensed that this child was about to change his life in ways he could never imagine. The doctors rushed Emily into the emergency ward. Machines beeped frantically, and James followed close behind, his chest heavy with a fear he had never known. When the lab results came back, Dr. Clara's face turned grave. The child carried AB negative, one of the rarest blood types in the world. The blood bank had no supply. Each word felt like another door slamming shut, leaving James staring into darkness. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. "I'm AB negative. Take mine, right now." For once, his voice was not that of a billionaire giving orders, but of a desperate man clinging to hope. Nurses moved quickly, preparing the equipment, the urgency thick in the air. James rolled up his sleeve, veins ready, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. For a moment he thought he had finally regained control, that his blood would save her. But then everything stopped. Dr. Clara looked at the monitor with alarm. The system flagged a consanguinity risk. Her voice shook as she explained that direct donation could be dangerous if James was indeed biologically related to the girl. The words hit him harder than any financial loss ever could. "She may be your blood relative." The room spun around him, as if gravity itself had turned cruel. James froze, staring at the small body on the hospital bed, pale and fragile, her chest rising in uneven waves. The possibility pierced through his guarded mind like lightning. Could this child be his? His breath caught, and his throat burned, as though all the air had vanished from the room. His hand trembled against the metal railing of the bed. A man who had faced ruthless boardrooms, now undone by the thought of fatherhood, whispered through medical data. The urgency did not fade. Emily's numbers kept falling. Nurses exchanged worried glances, and alarms wailed as if counting down the seconds of her life. James could only stand there, paralyzed between hope and horror, his blood useless when it mattered most. For the first time, he wished the system was wrong, wished science would step aside and let him give her a chance. Instead, he was left in silence, heart pounding, realizing that the truth about this little girl was about to change everything he thought he knew about his past. James gripped the rail of the hospital bed, his knuckles white as he shouted at Dr. Clara. "Use my blood, she is slipping away." His voice cracked under the weight of panic, but Clara shook her head firmly, her tone cutting through the chaos. "If you are her father, it could trigger fatal complications. We cannot risk it." The words slammed into him harder than any boardroom defeat, and for the first time, rage took over fear. The alarms shrieked louder as Emily's vitals plunged. Nurses darted back and forth, their urgent commands filling the air, but the sound barely registered. James slammed his fist against the wall, the pain radiating through his hand, yet doing nothing to quiet the storm inside. He barked at the staff to move faster, demanded answers no one could give. His voice carried the desperation of a man watching everything he never knew he had slipping through his fingers. Carter burst into the room, his face pale. "The blood bank has no AB negative left. Not here, not in the entire state." James staggered back, nearly losing his balance. The man who had bought fleets of planes and moved nations with contracts could not summon a single pint of blood. The thought twisted his stomach, leaving him raw and hollow. Dr. Clara pressed on, her calm voice a stark contrast to the storm raging in James. "We need to widen the search. Red Cross, military bases, anywhere. But time is against us." James slammed both palms on the counter, leaning over as if he could force the world to bend. His chest heaved, sweat dripping down his temple as he muttered that he would break every rule, buy every lab, tear down every wall if it meant saving her. Yet every desperate word fell flat against the truth, staring back at him. If he acted recklessly, he could kill her faster. The monitors flashed red, a cruel countdown of seconds running out. James's shoulders shook with fury as he stared at Emily's tiny frame fighting for breath. Rage and terror fused into something unbearable, hotter than any fire he had faced in the corporate world. This was no contract, no profit, no empire at stake. This was his flesh and blood slipping away, and he had never felt more powerless in his life. As James stood outside the emergency room, every alarm inside still echoed in his ears. The name that haunted him rose from the shadows of his mind, Marissa Lewis. She had been the only woman who ever broke through his walls, and she had walked away 7 years ago without a word. He remembered her laughter, her quiet strength, and the night she left with tears in her eyes, leaving him furious and confused. Carter approached quietly, holding a thin folder. His face carried the weight of bad news. "There is no recent record of her, except one. She died in Denver 2 years ago." The words landed like a hammer against James's chest. He gripped the folder, his knuckles stiff, as though it might hold an answer to the questions that had tormented him for years. James opened it, staring at the report that confirmed what he feared. A fatal accident, alone, no family to claim her. He felt the air leave his lungs, as if a piece of himself had been buried with her. Memories rushed back, of how she had whispered that she was afraid, that she needed space. He had let pride and anger drive her away. And now, she was gone forever. His gaze drifted back to the hospital doors, where a child fought for her life. His voice broke in a whisper no one else could hear, and she left this child alone. The truth pressed down on him, heavy as stone. If Emily was Marissa's daughter, then she was his. The possibility tore through him with both hope and unbearable guilt. He could not escape the thought that his silence, his arrogance, had cost Marissa her chance at help, and had left a little girl abandoned in the world. Emily stirred faintly on the hospital bed, her lashes fluttering against flushed cheeks. Her tiny hand searched blindly until it caught James's fingers, holding on with the weak grip of someone between worlds. Her lips parted, and in a voice so faint it was almost air, she whispered, "Daddy, don't let them take me." Then her eyes rolled back, and she slipped into unconsciousness again. James froze as if struck by lightning. His whole body trembled as the word "Daddy" echoed in his ears. He had faced storms, lawsuits, betrayals, but nothing had ever pierced him like the fragile plea of a child who might be his own. He lowered his head to the edge of the bed, clutching her small hand against his forehead, whispering that he was sorry, that he should have been there, that he would never fail her again. The room was thick with the hum of machines, every beep a reminder of how close she was to slipping away. Dr. Clara worked quickly with the nurses, her voice calm but sharp as she ordered fluids and oxygen. James could barely breathe. He felt trapped in a nightmare where power meant nothing, where all his wealth could not buy a drop of the blood she needed. Then Carter rushed in, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice carried a thin thread of hope. Red Cross confirmed a match. One compatible donor, AB negative. But the donor was across the state in California, at least a few hours away. James's chest tightened as if the walls were closing in. He gripped Carter's arm, demanding if they could fly the donor in, if the hours they had left would be enough. Dr. Clara glanced at the monitor, her face grave. Without transfusion, Emily's time was slipping through their fingers. The distance stretched before them like a cruel joke, and no one could answer the only question that mattered. Would help arrive in time, or had fate already made its choice? By morning, the story had already leaked, splashed across every screen and headline. Billionaire linked to secret sick child. Paparazzi swarmed outside the hospital, shouting questions that cut like knives. Was Emily the result of an affair? Was the empire built on lies? James stood at the window, jaw tight, watching as strangers turned his daughter's suffering into scandal. Inside the boardroom, the betrayal came quieter but no less cruel. Miles Grant sat across the table, his tone measured, even sympathetic on the surface. "James, you know I care about the company as much as you do. The investors are panicking. If this story isn't contained, our entire empire could crumble." His words dripped with concern, but his eyes held something colder, something calculating. James's fist clenched against the polished wood. "She almost died, Miles. She is 6 years old. I don't care about headlines." His voice shook, not from fear but from the weight of anger and exhaustion. Miles leaned forward, lowering his voice as if offering advice. "I'm not saying we don't help her. I'm saying we must be careful how it looks. If the press confirms she's yours, everything you've built will be at risk. You could lose control." The implication was sharp but wrapped in silk. Miles was not forbidding him. He was dangling a choice, tempting him to value power over blood. James's chest heaved as he stared at the man who had once been his partner, the one he thought he could trust. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as Miles pressed on. "Let us handle the narrative. Distance yourself publicly, and we can protect both you and the company. It's the only way to survive this storm." James slammed his palm on the table, the crack echoing through the sterile boardroom. "I don't care if I lose the empire. I won't lose her." The words silenced even the most hardened executives around them. For years, James had buried grief beneath numbers, hidden behind power. But now, every wall had shattered. Miles leaned back, his expression unreadable, but a flicker of irritation betrayed him. He had not expected James to choose his daughter over the empire. Outside, the cameras kept flashing, headlines multiplying by the hour. Inside, the stakes were no longer just about business. James knew then that this was not only a fight for his daughter's life, but also a fight for truth against those who valued image over humanity. And Miles, for all his polished words, had revealed where his loyalty truly lay. The rush of footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor as the donor was wheeled in under escort. James rose from his chair, every nerve on fire, as if salvation itself had arrived in human form. Dr. Clara gave a sharp nod, and the team moved quickly to begin the transfusion. James pressed his hand against the glass of the observation window, watching as the red line of life flowed into Emily's fragile body. Minutes felt like hours. The monitor beeped with uneven rhythm, each sound pulling him to the edge of despair. He lowered his head, whispering a prayer he had not spoken in decades. God, don't take her from me too. Take my wealth, take my empire, but leave me this child. The weight of his own words shook him, because they were not spoken like a bargain but like a confession long overdue. Inside the room, Emily's chest rose weakly at first, then steadier with each passing moment. The color began to return to her cheeks, faint but undeniable. Dr. Clara signaled to the nurses with a rare hint of relief, though no one dared relax fully yet. James felt his body collapse back into the chair, tears stinging his eyes as the impossible became possible. Hours later, the crisis eased. Emily's breathing grew more even, her small chest rising with a rhythm that gave hope. James sat outside the recovery room, his hands clasped so tightly they ached, but he did not notice. For the first time since his wife's death, he had prayed, and for the first time, he felt someone might have heard him. The next morning, Dr. Clara walked into the quiet waiting room where James sat, his face pale from exhaustion. She held a folder close to her chest, her expression steady but heavy. The preliminary DNA results had come in, and the truth could no longer be delayed. She told him that the test confirmed a 99% probability. Emily was his biological daughter. The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. James felt the ground shift beneath him. His breath caught as memories of Marissa collided with the image of Emily lying fragile in the recovery room. He whispered to himself that she had been his all along, and he never even knew. Clara went on, explaining something more disturbing. Before her death, Marissa had reached out to the company, leaving a record of multiple attempts to contact James. The documents had been intercepted and buried. James's eyes narrowed, the anger rising like fire. There was only one person with the power to silence Marissa's voice: Miles Grant. He stormed into the boardroom, slamming the folder on the polished table. His voice shook with controlled rage as he confronted his partner. You buried her voice to save a brand. You let her die unheard. You almost cost my daughter her life. Miles did not flinch, his tone as cold as ever. I saved you from scandal. I protected the empire. Investors would have destroyed you if they had known. His words dripped with arrogance, as if reputation outweighed blood. James leaned across the table, his glare burning. You protected yourself. You killed her chance to live. And you almost killed my daughter. The silence that followed was suffocating. For years, James had trusted this man with his company, his legacy. Now he saw the betrayal in full light, the greed that had placed an empire above a dying woman and an innocent child. The weight of the truth pressed hard, but it also cleared the fog. James knew he could not stay silent. If Miles was willing to bury the past once, he would do it again. The empire had been built on lies, and it was time the truth broke free, no matter the cost. The press conference hall was filled with blinding lights and restless voices. James walked onto the stage, his suit immaculate, but his eyes heavy with the weight of truth. For the first time in years, he stood not as a billionaire or a CEO, but as a father with nothing left to hide. He raised the microphone, his voice steady but touched with emotion. The little girl fighting for her life in this hospital is my daughter. Her name is Emily. The room fell silent, reporters frozen mid-breath as his words cut through the noise. James paused, gathering strength, then continued. Years ago, her mother tried to reach me. She was silenced. Those who claimed to protect my empire buried her voice. Because of that, Emily almost died. His voice broke, raw and trembling, but he did not look away. He wanted every camera, every headline, to see his shame and his vow. I built airports across the world, but I failed to open the one door that mattered most, the door to my own child. I will not make that mistake again. There is no empire, no fortune, no legacy more valuable than a child's life. Every word carried a weight heavier than contracts or profits. He spoke not as a man defending his image, but as one laying his heart bare to the world. When he lowered the microphone, the silence deepened. Some reporters wiped their eyes, others lowered their cameras in respect. The cruelty of scandal melted into something more human, something even the sharpest headlines could not twist. In that moment, James had not only claimed his daughter, he had reclaimed his soul. Weeks later, Emily no longer looked like the fragile child James had carried into the hospital. Her cheeks carried color again, and her laughter echoed through the halls of the Whitmore estate. She had her own room now, filled with books, soft curtains, and the worn stuffed rabbit resting proudly on her pillow. The house, once silent as stone, felt alive with the sound of her footsteps. In the garden, James walked slowly among the roses he had once ignored. At the far end stood a small memorial for Marissa, simple but tender, a stone with her name surrounded by white blooms. James often paused there at dawn, whispering apologies into the morning air, promising that Emily would grow up knowing her mother's love, even if Marissa could no longer speak it herself. One afternoon, Emily ran across the lawn, sunlight spilling over her hair as she called out, "Daddy, look at me." She stumbled into his arms, her small body warm and vibrant. James knelt to hold her close, whispering that she was his miracle, the second chance he never thought he deserved. Then Emily tilted her head, her eyes curious, and asked softly, "Daddy, where's my mummy?" James froze for a heartbeat, the question piercing him deeper than any headline or scandal ever had. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and nodded gently. "I'll tell you about her, sweetheart. Not today, but when you're ready. I'll tell you how brave she was and how much she loved you." His voice trembled, but it carried both truth and promise. Emily nestled against his chest, satisfied with his answer for now. James looked toward the white roses, swaying in the breeze, the memorial standing firm against the fading light. For the first time in years, he felt whole. The empire might still be uncertain, but his heart had found its anchor. Love and truth had healed wounds that power never could. And as he held his daughter in the quiet of the garden, James knew this was the legacy worth protecting for the rest of his life. From the moment James found a fragile little girl on a cold airport chair to the day she ran free in the garden, his world was forever changed. What began as helpless fear became a revelation of love, truth, and family. This story reminds us that compassion and honesty can heal wounds deeper than power or wealth. If this story touched you, share your feelings in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to Emotional Echoes so more hearts can feel these echoes of life. Thanks for listening.